What is good, everyone? Don James back with another video. Will Lilo and Stitch revive Disney's remakes? Despite its reputation now, there was a time, believe it or not, when Disney's remakes were quite popular. I mean, heck, look at the top 10 chart for the highest grossing remakes. Nearly 5 of them made $1 billion. But kind of around the 2019 point, there started to be a cultural shift in the perspective towards Disney remakes. Beforehand, much of the general public would acknowledge that the remakes weren't nearly as good as the originals, except on rare occasions. But after 2019, I'd say especially after the release of The Lion King, the attitude and reputation towards remakes noticeably started to shift, both financially and critically, all seeming to culminate in the global abomination known as Snow White. Since The Lion King, Disney has made 9 remakes. Nearly half of these movies weren't even released theatrically. 4 out of these 9 movies were released straight to Disney Plus, and it arguably should have been 5. And the only one of these movies that was really badly affected by COVID was Mulan. The rest were released pretty far apart or before the pandemic, to where that wasn't the reason why it was released to streaming. But I'll go into each of these one by one. First up, there's Maleficent II, released about 3 months after the Lion King remake. This arguably doesn't even have to be considered a remake, but obviously the characters are still based off of the animated version of Sleeping Beauty, so it's still a form of a live-action adaptation, I guess. Anyways, as with just about all of the Disney remakes released that year, Maleficent II got a negative score from the critics, and the audience score was positive with a 95. The passionate hate that I have for verified audience cannot be put into words. So when you actually move it to all the audience, the score actually becomes an 89%, which again was another common trend throughout 2019. While critics didn't tend to like the Disney remakes, the audiences typically did. And at the box office, Maleficent 2 made a decent amount, but in the end, it broke even, so it really didn't have a profit. And on top of that, it had a 35% decline from Maleficent 1 at the box office. But with full context, 2019 was one of the most financially dominant years, especially for Disney, of all time. So Maleficent 2 is probably also overshadowed by the many major blockbusters that were coming out that year. So still, Maleficent 2 showed promising signs overall for Disney's remakes. And then, Lady and the Tramp came out. This movie was released in November of 2019. Holy crap! Disney released 5 remakes in 1 year? Well, anyways, Lady and the Tramp was the last of Disney's 5 remakes that year, and maybe it was unsurprising that it ultimately was released straight to streaming. I mean, there's only so much money to go around in 1 year for Disney movies, and most people at that point were probably saving their money to watch Disney destroy their childhoods in December. Lady and the Tramp may have been one of the pinnacle starting points for when Disney remakes really started to fall out of graces with the general public. Obviously, this movie didn't make any box office revenue because Disney Plus, but when it comes to the critical scores, while the critics gave it a more generous 67%, the audience found it to be a much more stale and forgettable film, giving it a 50%. So, as you could see, quite a discrepancy between the critics and the audience. And believe me, this will not be the last time that you see that. Enter 2020 Mulan, or the Snow White before Snow White. So this movie was quite a mess of controversies, from comments made by its lead actress, to questionable filming locations, to a notoriously horrific redoing of Mulan's character. Taking the grit, perseverance, and determination of the original animated Mulan and turning her into essentially a generic chosen one perfect character quickly earned the live-action Mulan a spot in the Hall of Fame of botched girl boss characters. And believe me, this will not be the last time that Disney will catch fire for botching the live-action versions of animated female characters. Not to mention the fact that this movie also had a $30 pay-to-watch feature on Disney+. So essentially, asking you to pay 3 times the amount that you would already be paying for a regular movie ticket to watch a crappy version of a movie that you've already seen before done way better. Nice going, Disney. But critics were positive on the movie and they gave it a 71%, while the audience gave the film a 46%. So second movie in a row with quite a discrepancy between what the critics wanted and what the general public wanted. Unsurprisingly, Mulan was not a hit at the box office, but I mean, of course it wasn't because of COVID. But let's be real, even if COVID wasn't there, this movie probably would have still bombed. Now, Kruella was a nice change of pace in the midst of Disney's declining remakes. It was quite unique, being one of their first remakes to be rated PG-13. Dang, I guess that means it was mature. But the movie was well received, getting positive scores from both the critics and the audience. The movie also grossed $233 million against a $100 million budget, so it was also a pretty nice box office success. So maybe Kruella was hope for things to come in the future for Disney remakes. Right? So when it comes to the plethora of Disney remakes, it doesn't get much worse than Pinocchio. Well, actually, maybe it does. How much did they have to pay Tom Hanks to be in this movie? Were they holding his son hostage? Like, what convinced him to sign on to a film like this? But anyways, Disney definitely knew that they made a pile of garbage with this film, so they just sent it directly to Disney+. So, no box office earnings at all, of course. And man, just look at these critical scores. 27 from both the critics and the audience. When was the last time that you've seen the exact same score from the critics and audience? That's how bad this movie was. But I'm not even really going to spend any more time on this. Pinocchio, you're not a real boy. Wow, that joke was pretty lame. Peter and Wendy. One of those classic movies where people are more interested in watching someone rip it to shreds than watch the movie itself. The trailers for this movie were quite infamous, and I think the primary thing that many people took away from it was that Disney was more interested in political correctness than actually adapting Peter Pan. And yet again, Disney sent this movie straight to Disney+, making it the second movie in a row that Disney sends straight to streaming. And it definitely wasn't because of the pandemic, because it was quite a few years from that and Cruella was released theatrically. Not really a good sign for the direction of their remakes. And the general rule of thumb is, with the exception of pandemic Pixar movies, anytime that you see a Disney Plus original movie, you know it's probably gonna suck. But, yet again, the critics enjoyed this movie, giving it a 65%. Now, just a quick point. A couple weeks ago, I made a short talking about the 3 lowest rated remakes on IMDb. And Peter and Wendy came in second with a 4.4 out of 10 on IMDb, which shows you that the audience really did not like this movie. But that doesn't even compare to how much the audience hated it on Rotten Tomatoes. 11%. As I said before, much of the audience criticism was directed at the politically correct nature of the movie, including a lot of people who were irritated with Wendy and felt like she was a shallow attempt at like a girl boss character. And believe me, this will not be the last time that Disney will catch fire for botching the female live-action version. But in the last 4 movies that we've talked about, 3 of them were released straight to streaming, and 3 out of the 4 got positive scores from the critics and negative scores from the audience. But hey, a live-action Renaissance movie is coming up, and it's going to be released theatrically. Those tend to make around $1 billion, so surely this one will be a smash hit, right? Right? So The Little Mermaid came out in 2023, being a live-action adaptation of the very first Renaissance movie. This movie did catch controversy early on in its casting because, well, let's just say that when Ariel sang,
"Up where they walk, up where they run, up where they stay all day in the sun,"
she really liked the song. Alright, I'm back. Sorry, YouTube. So The Little Mermaid garnered a 67% from the critics on Rotten Tomatoes, and for the audience, it got a 57%. Now, how much of that could be attributed to people who didn't watch the movie and just gave it a negative score from the race swap? I'm not entirely sure. But it still continues the trend of critics liking the movie while the audience liked it significantly less. This is the 4th out of the last 5 movies that I've talked about. And when it came to the box office for The Little Mermaid, it's quite complicated. On one hand, the movie did gross $570 million at the box office, and was one of the top 10 highest grossing movies of 2023. But on the other hand, by most calculations, this movie at best was a mild profit, at worst a mild box office bomb, and most likely it just broke even. And especially given the subject matter, that's quite bad. As I said, the Renaissance films, especially when released theatrically, they tend to make $1 billion. And Little Mermaid was projected and expected to make at least close to $1 billion. And it certainly didn't even come close to that. Hey, quick editing note. My stupid self apparently doesn't know how to read charts, as Little Mermaid actually wasn't a top 10 highest grossing film of 2023. It was probably around 11th or 12th, but not in the top 10. And when you actually look at the chart, people were more interested in seeing a prequel to Willy Wonka and a 10th Fast and Furious movie before they were willing to see a landmark Renaissance film. Yikes. On top of that, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, that movie was considered to be a major box office disappointment and even a box office bomb, and yet it still grossed more money than Little Mermaid. So that's quite unfortunate. Though it did have a higher budget though, so that's probably why it was a bomb, but that's still pretty underwhelming for a movie that should be as significant as The Little Mermaid. Mufasa.
I just hear that name and I shudder. Mufasa. Ooh. Do it again.
The Lion King.
Mufasa.
Now, Mufasa the Lion King is quite an interesting live-action adaptation. I don't think that this movie was necessarily as popular as The Little Mermaid, but it did carry the brand recognition of The Lion King. And people always seem to be ready to pay big money for anything being The Lion King. In one of the most unforgivable moves by the general audience, they managed to make The Lion King remake the highest grossing animated film of all time for almost 5 years. But anyways, the big story that centered around Mufasa the Lion King around the time of its release was its tight competition with Sonic 3 and which movie was gonna gross more at the box office. When it came to opening weekend, the winner was Sonic 3. The winner was Sonic 3. Unfortunately, when it came to the total worldwide box office run, Mufasa did definitely win. One of those classic examples of losing a battle but winning the war. Mufasa grossed about $720 million at the worldwide box office, and it even beat out Sonic by about $20 million at the domestic box office. Now, some of that could be attributed to the fact that the Lion King brand and Disney have a wider financial and global reach and appeal than the Sonic movies do, as well as the fact that the Mufasa movie just sat in theaters for a way longer time. But nonetheless, it was definitely a box office success. Now critically, there was an interesting flip, where the critics were the ones that were negative, but the general audience was actually positive. And to me, this highlights a noticeable trend throughout all of these remakes, even dating back to the billion-dollar Renaissance remakes. The audience will typically like a live-action adaptation if it sticks closely to the source material, or if it creates a new prequel or sequel story, while the critics will typically be more negative towards those. However, when live-action adaptations make more changes to the original source material, the critics often will be more accepting of those changes than the audience will be. So, Mufasa the Lion King being a prequel was something that stood out to the audience and resonated with them more than for the critics. But, as I just said, the audience will typically not be very pleased when a live-action adaptation makes major changes to the direct source material, especially when those changes are for political reasons, which is a nice segue into Snow White pretty much serves as the symbolic breaking point between years of growing frustration towards remakes as well as the Disney brand as a whole. There are so many controversies and issues and just terrible decisions that this movie went through that I don't even really want to go through all of them. But I'll fast track through some of them. There was Rachel Zegler, Gal Gadot's acting, the non-dwarves, the horrifying dwarves, Rachel Zegler again, political correctness, plotlines on taking back a kingdom, Rachel Zegler again. Disney knew that this movie was as good as dead on arrival, so they didn't even bother giving it a premiere screening. And dead it certainly is. Snow White is one of the lowest rated remakes by the critics, and if you needed more proof of just how stupid verified audience is, they apparently gave it a 72, but a quick shift will show you, yeah. And on top of that, Snow White is quickly making a place as one of the worst box office bombs, not just for Disney, but of all time. This movie was one of Disney's most expensive films of all time, and the worldwide box office is running well behind the production budget alone, not even factoring in the marketing costs. Truly one of the worst disasters in the history of Disney. So, will Lilo and Stitch revive Disney's remakes, or are Disney's remakes officially dead? My guess would be the remakes are dead. Lilo and Stitch is one of the more popular films from Disney's post-Renaissance era, and I wouldn't be surprised if a good bit of people do like the movie, but I don't think it's really going to revive overall trust or desire for any future Disney remakes. Nor do I think Lilo and Stitch will be a huge hit at the box office per se. Definitely not enough to offset how bad Snow White did. So Disney's got a lot on their hands that they have to consider and process. Perhaps if they didn't make that many changes to their remakes, even though a lot of the general public might talk about how much they dislike remakes, there's still a better chance that they're going to make money with the less changes that they make. But even if they do that, I still do think more of the general public has turned against their overall framework of remakes, that it would not be enough to make their live-action adaptations the same billion-dollar hits that they once were. They'd probably be better off just telling completely original stories or just making sequels to their animated works. But what do you think? Let me know down below in the comments section. Do you think that Disney's remakes are officially dead, or do you think there's still some life left in the tank? Thank you for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.